I think that's, for me, I would just as soon say, you know what, just eliminate this whole ordinance and let's stick with what we have, because, by the way, Mr. Adam, we do have restrictions in that ordinance. There are restrictions about the number of people. There are restrictions about parking. There's restrictions about setbacks. There, you go through here, you know, it may not be in a nice chart, but there are restrictions. And so to kind of make it seem like this is now a free-for-all, it's not going to be that way. So I just am very reluctant to spend a cent more on this, and that's it.
Well, all I can say is, just because you spend a lot of money, if you don't like the product, you shouldn't go ahead with it. So a bad decision is a bad decision, no matter how much it costs.
Well, and I would disagree, because we don't even know. You've pointed out one thing or a couple things. Maybe they can be fixed while we're sitting up here, but you're going to throw the whole thing out, and I'm not sure why. Supervisor Carbajal made a suggestion. And
Well, I actually said go back to another task force, but that's what that was.
well,
a
yeah, you know,
suggestion.
yeah, that's a
Okay.
no.
If Supervisor Farr turns her light on, she'll get called on. There you go.
Yeah, right. All right. Well,
You started it.
you know, here's an idea. You know, I've already said I'm not interested in throwing this out. I feel like, even though issues have been raised by members of the Vintners Association, that, you know, what we do is we work in specifics. And again, I think Supervisor Wolf, you mentioned Mr. Woolbrandt and talking about tweaking, who is certainly experienced in these things. So the actual ordinance itself is about 17 pages. And, you know, I would, consider appointing a task force, or having the board consider appointing a task force. If, you know, if the industry, wants to just look at these 18 pages and pull out the sections that they feel are really wrong. And I'd be happy to make a motion that we continue this to December 6th or something, just to take public comment on what comes back from the Vintners Association as to what their specific changes are to this, and what they would want to see a task force work on, and what that might look like. So I'm open to taking a look at that, if they're willing to do it. But I'm not sure if they're willing to do it that way. All right. So,
Mr. Gazzoni was trying to jump in.
Chair Adam and Supervisors, just on the thought of the structure for receiving further input, I would just caution that if the board is actually appointing or directing a task force, that sounds like a formal action of the board that would make that a Brown Act body, as opposed to just receiving input at a future hearing.
well, I don't think we're there yet, because we're not agendized to, the whole idea of a task force just came up today, and we have no information on that. We have no suggested options for a makeup of it, who would appoint, who, all that kind of thing. So, all I was trying to do was narrow the focus, if it should go forward and come back to those specific issue areas, and if they could be looked at in the ordinance, with options for, what kind of a task force they would suggest. And that, it's their input. Wouldn't want our staff to do anything on it. Would be the Vintners Association submission to the board to come back. I would say in December 6th, that's the Santa Maria hearing, might give them enough time to do that. And then, take input. It's a public process. Everybody would weigh in on that, and we would decide, how we wanted to move forward from there before we decide whether we're going to vote this thing up or down.
Let me just say that 12.6 looks like an 8-hour meeting without any closed session, by the way. So I don't think that's going to work. And just for myself, I'm not going to support that, because I think that if you're not going to throw it out, then you have to redo it properly, and if you don't want to redo it properly, then throw it out or pass it. But, you know, I wouldn't be supporting it.
Chair Adam, if I may say, on the dates, just, you're absolutely right. It's a long meeting on 12/6. So I was going to suggest, if it's the board's will, you could hold a meeting on the 22nd of November.
I'm glad to do that.
I will not be here.
Can we find
No,
a date where you will be here, Mr. Adam?
I could do that, but. Okay, Supervisor Lavanino said he would be here on the 22nd.
I will be here. I will be
Supervisor
here.
Carvajal
I will
said he
be
would
here.
be here on the 22nd.
Oh,
Supervisor
I'll
Wolf,
change my plans to be here.
Oh, Jesus.
Supervisor Wolf,
Would this be this would be in Santa Maria?
Yes, it'll be
yeah,
in Santa Maria.
we
Yes.
could,
Yeah, I'll just change some things.
so we would have to set a special meeting next week for the 22nd in Santa Maria, just
That's correct.
to hear this item. All right, so.
And let's make sure that none 14 other things don't get snuck in on it.
So I saw some nods from Ms. McLaughlin. Could you come to the microphone and just say yes, that this is something you think the association would do?
Can you clarify what the meeting is and what we are directed to do?
Well, we would set a special meeting on Tuesday, November 22nd in Santa Maria here. We would ask that your organization submit a letter, prior to the deadline for that meeting, to have focused issue areas that your membership is particularly concerned about, as well that are in the ordinance, and if you could even cite specific sections of the ordinance, and then one or more options for a task force. And I know that you mentioned to me that there have been task forces in other counties, and so I know that you and probably other members of your organization have thoughts on that.
So we have already supplied to each of you our specific concerns. We certainly can provide that again on November 22nd. We also did provide the suggested makeup of the 18-member task force that is representative of all the impacted stakeholders. So quite honestly, we can rework what we've previously submitted, but it's not really addressing the issues, and we really would prefer moving forward with a task force now. If our only option is to come back on November 22nd for another meeting, we obviously will take that. And
I don't think she's understanding. So Morgan, just clarification really quick. We can't appoint a task force at this meeting because we're not agendized for it. So what we're saying is come back, tell us what you want, reframe what you want, and then at that meeting, then we would put forth a task force if it works for if that's what the vote is. But we can't do it today.
And what is the agendized procedure? What's the procedure for agendizing a formation of a task force? Is that something that we have to put forth, or is that has to come from the?
We can continue this item and renotice it, right, for consideration of a task force. Is that right?
Chair Adam and Supervisors, again, I'm suggesting that if you wanted broader input, there are two different, very distinct things. One would be the board appointing a body, which would make that body a Brown Act body. The second would be just receiving input from whatever organization wanted to, if they want to be a task force and then report their findings and receive that from the industry. That would be perhaps less cumbersome because it would not be a Brown Act body.
Well, here's my problem with
I
this.
think you're jumping ahead because we're not ready to do anything today. We're just trying to continue the hearing to the 22nd,
Well-
get specific information from the Vintners Association.
So the board could certainly today continue the item and at the same time set the special meeting for the
Well-
22nd.
The problem is, I may or may not be willing to vote for continuing the item. If we're not going the task force route, then I don't see the point. Because here's the problem.
Right. No,
If they say, I don't like this clause and this clause creates this problem, and we can't address the language in the problem, then, if they're reduced to taking sections out and redlining it only with no other additions, and of course, if they want to make additions, then we got to go back through staff and they've got to go massage it because it's going to create other problems and there's going to be ripple effect. So, unless we're going to re-engage in this process and continue it and come up with a good result, then I'm not sure I'm up for that. Mr. Gazzoni.
Chair Adam and Supervisors, so I know we'll receive the motion on this, but the concerns we have on, just so we don't have surprises down the road, is that if you end up with modifications not previously considered by the Planning Commission, then that would have to go back to the Planning Commission also. So I'm just suggesting that the list of fix-it items that you might receive from industry might go beyond what the Planning Commission had actually considered and require a trip back to the Planning Commission. But you could certainly continue this item to a future hearing, receive, topics, address those topics, direct staff to act on those topics. So you could continue this to a future meeting.
Well, I'm not willing to come back on the 22nd unless we're going somewhere.
Well, Mr. Chair, I mean, I think what we heard over and over again today was the industry felt like they weren't heard. So I'm trying to give them an opportunity to tell us, very specifically in relation to the draft ordinance that's in front of us, what they like, what they don't like, how they would, like to change it, and they seem to think that setting up a task force might be a way to have more dialogue and discussion on some of these issues. So I'm trying to satisfy that concern. I'm open to it, and this is the best way I can think of to try to get to it.
I just, we had a task force recently on another issue, and we didn't adopt all of the recommendations, and we had a lot of discussion about recommending task forces in the future. I hate to set up expectations. I think there's already a feeling that members from the association haven't been heard. I'm hearing that, yes, some changes have been made. The Planning Commission did hear, did listen, did change. I would not be in favor of a task force. We have the letter from the Vintners Association. I think unless we're going to change some of these things today, I think we take an up or down vote and be done with this.
Okay, well, what I don't want to see happen is we just set up another opportunity for everybody to take a day off and come in and get their 3 minutes at best and still not be listened to. They will be heard but not listened to. So that's the problem for me.
But how do we know that till we try?
Well, if we're going to tell them, if we're telling them straight up,
Let's hear from them. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
if we're telling them straight up that we're not going to be able to change the language unless it goes back to the Planning Commission, which I'm willing to do, I'm fine with that. But if you're fine with that too, then I'm willing to come back on the 22nd. Mr. Levanino.
I think we're all saying the same thing. We're going to come back, and on the 22nd, we decide whether or not, based on what the letter is, we're going to form a task force and investigate it further. And then if somebody doesn't like the task force, you vote against the task force.
Okay,
If you
because
like
I
the
heard
task
some
force-
language in there that was confusing to me, and I thought that,
Well, I wouldn't want to bring it back the 22nd either if we're not going to, I mean, if we're just going to come back and do this again, then it's not, we'd obviously just vote
Well,
on it.
and they've already
Exactly.
written us a letter. That's what I just,
well, right, but
right? So are we going to hear anything different on the 22nd?
Well, that's what we'll find out.
Well, that's what, so we're going to get everyone together and find out if their letter is any different.
Mr. Chair, Supervisor
mean-
Farr, I encourage you to make a motion to just see how we vote.
And Chair Adam, before you do, I just wanted to let the board know that on the 22nd, Dr. Russell and Ms. Black are not here. The rest of the planning staff, I believe, are available, but they are not available.
they got this, right? All right, good deal.
Did anybody
We
bring a
heard
bottle?
All right, Mr. Chair, I move that we continue this hearing to a special meeting of Tuesday, November 22nd in Santa Maria to receive input in form of a letter from the Vintners Association detailing their concerns with the ordinance as written and with their suggestions for a consideration of appointing a task force.
Second. Do we need a roll call vote?
You know, I'm going to vote in favor of your motion, even though I can already tell you that the task force piece is really troubling. There's a part of me that would have liked you to separate the two, but that's okay.
Chair Adam, could I also suggest that if you have the special meeting, that you have a time certain for that, just for noticing purposes? It would be 9 o'clock.
Yes.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Before I vote on it, I do want to direct the Vintners Association to come correct with a very detailed what you like, what you don't like, so that there's not a bunch of ambiguity and we can get right to it. So whether we think it's a good idea or a bad idea, not platitudes, but real specific page number, paragraph, that's what we're looking for. So I'm a yes.
And can I just ask a question now?
You guys are totally out of control. You're all talking.
Well, this is the thing. This is the thing. We're allowing one group to come back to us. Shouldn't and we've had an attorney come up and represent the neighbors. Now,
Yeah.
so if we're opening it
Yeah.
up,
Hey,
then
let Mr. Fields.
so that's why I just want to make sure that we're not just. It's not just one group. It's an open hearing. So is that part of your motion then?
That's always the case in a public hearing.
Yeah.
Okay, I know. It's just that you mentioned Vintners Association, so I wanted to be clear.
Supervisor Carbajal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just so that everybody feels heard, the vintners, the neighbors, other stakeholders, make sure it gets in early so that everybody has an opportunity to give input and give input on each other's stuff, because at the end of the day, that's what we're going to consider.
And potentially issues for a task force. Why? No, I didn't. I just said I never made you speechless before. Yes, Ms. McLaughlin.
Chair, will the format be the same, where we would present a letter and then it's 3 minutes? I want to make sure that we have the opportunity for collaborative dialogue, because I'm finding this time to be the most valuable of the meeting today, and want to make sure that it's not just limited to a couple minutes of talk and not question and answer.
Well, what I want to tell you is how highly irregular what we're doing here today is. Yeah, so yeah, and if we bring, 1,000 people, everybody's not going to get 3 minutes. See, that's the thing. And we have a huge, as you can see, we have a huge agenda today, and so that agenda, if we can be successful in just keeping the one item on, then we've got plenty of time for it, and we should have 3 minutes that should be a doable deal. But what happens with these things several times in past experience is they get larded in with a couple of other subjects, and then that shortens the time period that we have. So as the chair, and you know, one of the things I really wanted to do and just didn't because I wasn't going to take the time, but since I'm now talking too much, I'm going to just pile some more on, is apologize to everybody, because I know you guys took a day off, and of all the days and all the compelling things that people say to us over the last 4 years for me, today was one of those days I really wanted to cheat as chair and just give everybody more time. But I can't do that because, you know, if I do that for one set of people, then I got to do it for everybody else. So I apologize to everybody. I had to cut off and hurry up and all that stuff. So anyway.
But Mr. Chair, if I could say that, you know, sometimes ahead of time speakers will say, I'm representing a group, I would like more time, I would like X amount of time, and that's at the discretion of the chair. So, you know, that's something that you and your organization could consider asking for.
Yeah. All right. So did we all vote on that? Yes? No? All right, let's have a roll call vote.
Ms. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Farr? Mr. Lavanino?
Aye.
Mr. Carbajal? Mr. Adam?
Aye.
5-0.
All right. All right, and now we're going to have a 10-minute break, and then we're coming back for item 3. Yes, Bloody Marys.
Mr. Adams.
All right, let's light this candle again. Let's read in item number 3, Mr. Allen, please.
Chair Adam and members of the board, item 3 from Public Works comes to the Board of Supervisors at the Board of Directors of the Flood Control and Water Conservation District. It's a hearing to consider recommendations regarding reacquisition of Santa Barbara County Flood Control and Water Conservation District suspended state water.
Don't we have to have public comment? Oh, man, I'll tell you what, when you get over too many hours, you get giddy supervisors. Mr. I don't know, it could go either way, real easy. We're bouncing along the edge of the razor blade here. Mr. Fayram.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Chair.
No pressure.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, this item was heard at your October 4th meeting of the Board of Directors of the Flood Control and Water Conservation District for the request from CCWA to reacquire approximately 12,000 acre-feet of state water. You directed to continue this item until today, and staff is here to take your direction on how to proceed. From our staff report on October 4th, staff's recommended options are to direct staff to return your board with an implementation agreement with CCWA that would comply with all the DWR conditions, cover our costs, liability, and any other direction that you would want to give staff.
All right, well, are we at public comment time? Can we do 2 minutes? Is that acceptable to everybody since it's the late hour? Okay. 4 minutes? Okay. Okay. All right, let's get it going here, Mr. Allen.
We're going to start with Stephen Americana, to be followed by Andy Caldwell.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, my name is Steve Americana. I'm General Counsel for the Central Coast Water Authority, and we're honored and pleased to be the third liquid on your agenda today.
Wine and water, that's right. That's right. Start his time, Mr. Allen.
So this is about water. This is the least controversial liquid on your agenda today, too.
Yeah, right.
Surprisingly enough.
Don't bet on it.
Don't bet on it. So the issue before you today requires you to balance 2 risks. The risk of a future drought versus the risk that the county treasury will be hurt in some fashion by the transaction we're asking you to approve. Let's first talk about a future drought. Nobody in this room, nobody watching on TV doubts for a minute that we're going to have more droughts. Maybe in Northern California, maybe here, maybe in both places. The program before you today, this water security program that we're talking about, will help reduce the risk of an impact on our local community of a future drought, because it makes water available when the drought that is inevitable hits us again. So let's talk about the risk to the county treasury. And your focus on this risk, which is a concern to a number of you, we believe is appropriate, because you need to watch out for this county's fiscal health. The fiscal risk, however, needs to be unpacked to be correctly analyzed. What's the risk that Santa Maria, which will be acquiring the very largest portion of this water, will default on making an annual payment of $1.5 million to the state after it has made an upfront lump sum payment of $28.5 million to get into the program and to get it off the ground? Can you imagine the Santa Maria City Council walking away from a $1.5 million annual payment after making that kind of an investment? So what happens if Santa Maria does this extraordinarily unlikely thing and decides not to make a $1.5 million payment in a given year? First of all, Santa Maria will lose the water that it spent $28.5 million to acquire in the first place. It'll be offered to the other CCWA members, the other
I hate
cities
to
and
tell you
water
this, Mr.
districts.
McConnor, but your time's up.
Oh, can I have another 30 seconds just to finish it?
God.
Thank
Okay.
you. If the other members don't want it, then the water gets offered to other water purveyors in the state of California. This is incredibly valuable water. Why? Because it costs so little to use and to acquire in years in which there is a drought. This is the cheapest water one can buy in the state system. And so the security for the county is the fact that this water will be readily resold in the extraordinarily remote likelihood that Santa Maria defaults.
All right.
That's your
Thank
protection.
you, Mr. Amerikaner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Caldwell's our next speaker. Then we're going to go to Santa Barbara for Richard Shakewitz and Robert McDonald, and then come back to Santa Maria.
Chair item, members of the...
Are you going to be able to do it in 2 minutes?
Oh,
or do we
heck
need...
yeah.
Okay.
But can you start it over? Because I already lost 6 seconds there. Andy Caldwell, representing CoLab. You know, we were around when the state water fight started and state water pipeline. Can you imagine, just for 1 minute, that not only would the South County be out of state water, they wouldn't be able to get supplemental water to the South County without that pipeline. 90% of the South County water supply comes from dams and reservoirs conveyed via pipelines and aqueducts. And the bottom line here is there is virtually nothing more important than water, and the only time we realize that is when we're out of it. I believe there's no chance whatsoever that any community is going to default on state water, the supplemental water. There's just no chance whatsoever because it's such a vital commodity. We desperately need it. And again, we're thankful for the fact that we have state water. We need this supplemental water. And, you know, the bottom line here in the North County is obviously the more water that the city buys from elsewhere, the less water they're going to be draining from the aquifer, which should help our farmers overall and the overall health and well-being of the community, plus the rest of the other people buying it. So we believe that any financial risk is really not even realistic. Thank you.
We're going to go to Santa Barbara for Richard Shakewitz, and then Robert McDonald, and then return here to Santa Maria for Chris Dahlstrom.
Hi. I'm president of the Montecito Water District, and I've been their representative to Central Coast Water for the past 10 years. When I first came on, I learned about this 12,000 acre feet of table A water. There was a question whether or not Santa Barbara County was even going to be able to have that water if they wanted it. There were a bunch of legal documents that continued it and said yes, well, maybe yes, and Central Coast argued with the state, and they finally got them to agree that yes, the first bite comes from Santa Barbara County. If in fact Santa Barbara County, if the vote is not to let them have it, there's a big problem, because almost every other district in the state is going to be fighting to get that water. They're going to be killing each other to get it. That's how crucial this is. We're in the worst drought in the history of the state. Everyone needs water. We all want water. Montecito would be here asking to take part in that, except, thank goodness, we're in negotiations with the city of Santa Barbara to try and get some of their desal water. But it truly is crucial. It truly is crucial to all the citizens of Santa Barbara County to have this water. It's necessary, it's important, and without it, we're all in big trouble. When's the next drought going to be? Who knows? When's this drought going to be over? Who knows? But as Mr. Amerikaner said, for certain, we're going to have another drought, assuming this one does end. And again, all of us need the water. Thank you.
Robert McDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and honorable members of the board. My name is Robert McDonald. I'm the General Manager for Carpenter Valley Water District. And you don't have to look hard to know that this is a severe drought that we've been in for the last 5 years. Lake Kachuma is essentially empty at this point, and we're relying on the State Water Project. I did a little calculation, and we had to, as a district, we had to go out and buy about 1,000 acre-feet of supplemental water to make it another year if there is no rain this winter. And we would not have had to do that if we would have had the suspended Table A. And I think, I echo the importance of the State Water Project getting us through this drought. We would have all been, it would have been a different picture completely if we wouldn't have had the State Water Project. I think looking forward, we should capture this water. It acts just like a drought buffer that we have currently, but it adds on to that, and so it adds some reliability during a drought. There are other changing conditions in water supply, particularly for the South Coast. We have a water rights order that's in the works right now that will probably impact our water supply coming out of Kachuma moving after 2020, so we need to be thinking about that. We have Sigma, which is going to affect groundwater basins throughout the county, but we're concerned about it in Carpinteria that it may impact our groundwater supplies. And then, as Mr. Americano mentioned, this water is by far the most economic. We hear a lot about rates as water agencies. We get a lot of complaints that rates are too high. And so we do things to try to manage those rates, and one of those things is look at the per unit cost of water supply. And this is a very competitive price compared to other options like desal and recycled water. It's about $900 an acre foot fully loaded compared to desal's $2,400 per acre foot. And for recycled water, $1,600 per acre foot. So thank you. So thank you.
Back to Santa Maria for Chris Dahlstrom, to be followed by Ray Stokes.
Good evening, supervisors. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Chris Dahlstrom, the General Manager of San Ynez River Water Conservation District, ID number 1. I've been up here before, spoken over regarding this very same topic. I've also been asked by the City of Solvang to share their opinion related to this reacquisition of the suspended water. They couldn't be here tonight. Actually, it is tonight. So our ID1's position has not changed. It is asking the Board of Supervisors to support and approve the action, which is to work with DWR, county work with DWR and CCWA to reacquire this water. This water is very important to ID1 and to the City of Solvang. Our share is 500 acre feet. Wish it was only $500. 500 acre feet for ID1, 300 acre feet for the City of Solvang. ID1 is in a position, as is the city, to have assets to cover the upfront cost as well as the ongoing annual cost of this water, which ID1's share of that annual cost is only $66,000 a year, which is easily obtainable. This water is very important to our profile. It not only provides for additional reliability, particularly in a drought, as mentioned, but it also provides us the ability not to go into the ground further. And that's exactly what ID1 and the City of Solvang will do. We'll continue. If we don't get this water, we will have no choice but to continue to go into the groundwater basin and mine that water. So this water is very important for two aspects. One, it is affordable, it creates reliability, and second, it avoids further going into the groundwater basin. So on behalf of City of Solvang and ID1, please consider moving forward as shown in the next steps to acquire the state water on behalf of CCWA and its contractors. Thank you very much.
Ray Stokes, to be followed by R.V. Savold.
Mr. Chair and members of the board, I'm Ray Stokes, Executive Director of the Central Coast Water Authority. We've met with many of you and the county staff, and we've heard a couple of concerns in our meetings with you. One was whether or not this water would be able to be spread around and the benefit applied to other members of CCWA that are not participating in this. And to that end, City of Santa Maria has agreed that, yes, in those years in which they have excess water, a portion of this water that's not needed for their needs, that they will be able to spread around to those agencies within CCWA that do need this additional water. And in fact, they demonstrated that this year by selling 2,000 acre-feet of water that was surplus to their needs to the Montecito Water District and 1,000 acre-feet of water that was surplus to the Goleta Water District. So they've already demonstrated that they're willing to do that. And then secondly, we heard that there was a concern about the potential risk to the county if there were a payment default. And as Mayor Connor stated, that is very remote. We believe it's very minimal. However, the city of Santa Maria has also agreed that they would place on deposit with CCWA funds equal to a year and a half of the costs associated with the supplemental water, which could be used in the event of a default by Santa Maria, which would give us time to sell the water if indeed that were to occur. So those two issues we believe we successfully addressed, and we are asking you to approve the recommendation of staff, which would be to enter into an agreement, allow us to negotiate amendments to the contract and agreement between CCWA and the county. Thank you.
Arvi Savold, to be followed by Carolee Krieger.
My name is Arvi Savold. I'm representing Seawind here. I'm a technical advisor to them. I addressed you in your last meeting on this and warned of some difficulties in the future that were especially risky and advised you that you should not approve this because of that. Mr. Mary Connor has given you a number of an investment for Santa Maria of $1.6 million, as if that were all that was required. That is a fixed cost investment that doesn't get them a drop of water. There are variable costs to getting the water here after you've gotten this entitlement that amount to over $300 an acre foot. So I do want these water agencies to be aware that this water is not quite as cheap as it's been made out to be. The task that the liability in the future is that if the Twin Tunnels project goes through, the amount of debt or fixed costs that will be assessed these water districts goes up. It's probably on the order of $600 an acre foot. So that will attach to this entitlement as well. So it no longer becomes cheap water at that point in time, which means that the supervisors here should fight vigorously if they approve this, to fight just as vigorously to make sure that the Twin Tunnels project does not go too. You can't have it both ways here. If you want the cheap water, you got to stop the Twin Tunnels. So my recommendation is that in protecting the county taxpayers, you must vote against this. And by the way, the agreement should be in the form of something like a water supply retention agreement so that the county is protected. And there's a lot of things that can be done there. So thank you very much.
Carolee Krieger, to be followed by Jack Boyson.
Thank you, Supervisors, for letting us speak today. Chair Adam, I'm here today to advocate that you do not take back this 12,000 acre feet of Table A, the suspended Table A, because of the liability issues that I see for the county. And it's not just the current liabilities, it's the liability if DWR extends the contract 50 years and builds the twin tunnels or anything else that DWR chooses to build. We will be here in Santa Barbara, we will be on the hook for all those costs. And that not only makes it not cheap water, that could really cause havoc, especially with the South Coast water agencies. I have a thought. Just as in 1991, the voters were allowed to vote on this, were asked to vote on this, because there is a liability issue and there are other cost issues. It's not just a straightforward snapshot of where we are today. Maybe it would be a good idea to let the voters who are going to have to pay for this vote on it. So that was a thought that I had. But I would urge you today to vote no on this, to protect our taxpayers and to protect Santa Barbara County. Thank you.
Jack Boyson. And then our final speaker will be Jerry Beatty.
Mr. Chair and members of the Board of Supervisors, I'm Jack Boyson, representing Central Coast Water Authority. I'm the chairman of Central Coast Water Authority. Again, we want to thank you for your time and consideration on this very important opportunity for the County of Santa Barbara. And I'll try and be brief and not repeat my comments from previous hearings. The importance of this additional water supply can, along with our current allocations, state water really cannot be overstated. The full allocation of this water represents 20% of the total water that would be used by the residents of the County of Santa Barbara. We fully realize that state water is not the only answer to our water shortages, but it is a very important component and one that is immediately available at a very, very low cost. Certainly, CCWA and its participating agencies will continue to work with the entire community to ensure the long-term water security for the entire county through conservation efforts as well as other alternative sources of supply. We, as you've heard from previous speaker, we have agreed to work with staff to provide security to indemnify the county for the ongoing fixed and variable costs in the unlikely event of a default. All upfront costs will be borne fully by the individual participants and will not be an obligation of the County of Santa Barbara. But additionally, and we will work with staff to provide an agreement that satisfactory to the Board of Supervisors that will ensure that any available excess water by participants will be made first available to the County of Santa Barbara members of CCWA at a price that reflects the true incremental cost to the agency in receipt of that water. In other words, surplus water will be offered to the other CCWA participants at cost. So your support on this proposal is greatly appreciated, and we look forward to your bringing back to you the final details in the very near future. Thank you.
Jerry Beatty.
Doesn't go up high enough for me. I also didn't get the memo about the dark suit and tie, so I'll have to apologize to the board for that. Good afternoon, Chairman Adam and members of the board. I am Jerry Beatty. I am currently a council member in the city of Guadalupe and also a board member of the Central Coast Water Authority. Recently, the CCWA began the process of reacquiring the 12,214 acre-feet of the suspended Table A water that was available to Santa Barbara County. We were given the opportunity to purchase this water on a one-time basis, and Guadalupe is only asking for 600 acre-feet of this water to be used as an expanded drought buffer. I did speak about this a few months ago regarding this matter, and there are a few issues that have changed, but most of the issues have not changed since then. This water is intended to be used within the existing Guadalupe city limits. It's not intended to be used for any expansion to the city. Guadalupe is essentially a landlocked community by agriculture, all of which is protected by the Williamson Act, except for one parcel. So there's little risk that this water could be used for any future growth for our community. We're seeking to increase our annual state water deliveries, which have fallen to an allocation of less than 40% over the last 7 years. Guadalupe's, we're behind this initiative to reacquire this water that really does belong to us, and to cover the one-time cost of securing the extra state water, we plan on using a 30-year bond. The annual cost of this bond has already been incorporated into the recent water rate increases that were adopted by the City Council in January of 2016. Our groundwater is also more expensive to recover, and due to a recent shutdown of one of our key groundwater wells, this becomes an even more challenging issue to acquire that water. This is the last state water that's available. There are no other available resources of water that Guadalupe can tap into. And if Santa Barbara County doesn't get this water, it will go to other communities, as some of the other gentlemen and folks have spoken about. They really don't have a legal right to it.
Okay.
The City of Guadalupe and the
Thank you, Mr. Beatty.
CCWA respectfully ask for your support in this reacquisition process, and I thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Back to the board. Seeing no lights, I'm going to call Mr. Americaner back if he would, see if he can answer one question. On behalf of CCWA and your members, that there is a joint and several liability, would you represent that there's a general, I'm sorry, Jiminy Christmas, it's late. Can you represent on behalf of your members that there's general, joint and several liability, and that is the understanding and agreement to indemnify the county in the event of a default by any participating member?
There will be an indemnification provision in the agreement that we enter into between CCWA and the county, yes.
So that already exists as a
That's
step-up clause, right?
And that, well,
That's
no,
the
that-
understanding of the step-up clause, is it not?
So they're actually two different indemnifications that we're talking about. The step-up provision exists in the contracts between CCWA and the water agencies, the cities and water districts that receive the water and distribute it to customers. If one of those water agencies defaults on its payments to CCWA, the other water agencies in that region of the county have an obligation to step up. In other words, they have an obligation to make up the payment that's in default and to acquire the water related to that payment. So the defaulting contractor loses water, and the other contractors in that region step up, take the water, and make the payment. That's how the existing contracts are arranged. There's a separate indemnification between CCWA as a joint powers agency and the county, the flood control district, I should say. There's an agreement that was signed in 1991, the Transfer of Financial Responsibility Agreement, under which CCWA as an entity, as a public agency, agreed to indemnify the county against all costs and expenses of the project. So that's a separate safety net, if you will, a separate guarantee, if you will, separate from the step-up provision. I hope I've made that clear.
Well, if I ask you if it's the understanding of all of the member agencies that they have joint and several liability to the county in the event of a failure to pay by any one of the members, is that a yes or no?
I believe the answer will be yes,
Okay,
because it's
perfect.
going to be an obligation of CCWA as a joint powers agency.
Okay.
Right?
Supervisor Farr.
Mr. Chair, just a clarification. Mr. Americano, you said that the step-up had to do with members on a regional basis?
Yes.
What exactly does that mean?
South of the mountains, north of the mountains.
Okay. So
So if
if
there's a default-
if a CCWA member defaults, it's only those other member agencies of CCWA that are either north or south of the mountains that are responsible.
Correct.
So if Goleta defaults, it's only responsible of Santa Barbara, Montecito, and Carpinteria.
Correct.
If Santa Maria defaults, it's only the responsibility of Guadalupe, Solvang,
Correct.
ID1.
Correct.
Okay, Bealton. So it's not the whole CCWA
No.
together supporting each other.
The step-up was set up on a regional basis.
Okay,
Largely,
that's the first time I've heard that, I have
right,
to say.
but it was done largely because of the difficulty of transferring the water from the defaulting contractor to the other contractors. It's the issue of, can you deliver the water related to the defaulted payments to the other agencies that are stepping up to pay for it? And that's why it was set up that way originally.
Mr. Gazzoni, but don't leave Mr. Americano.
I'm not.
Chair Adam and Supervisors, I just want to build a little bit on Mr. Americano's answer while he's here, and that is within the joint powers agreement that formed CCWA, there's a recitation that the obligations of CCWA are those of the JPA alone and don't pass through. So as we're talking about security for this 12,000 acre feet of water, one thought would be that to execute the joint and several liability that Mr. Americano has discussed, we would want to potentially have a separate agreement that made clear that the liabilities of CCWA don't stop at the edge of the JPA, but would have actually indemnification by certain members of CCWA also.
Well, that sounds good. A couple more questions for Mr. Americano. Can the step-up clause Can the step-up clause be enforced by the county against the purveyors?
So we have to talk about which step-up clause we're talking about. The step-up clause that exists under the 1991 contracts, I don't know who has the right to enforce that. Ray, do you remember offhand?
Are you talking about the step up? So if you're talking about the liability associated with this additional water, what we are envisioning is there will be a contract between CCWA and the county in which we will indemnify you and hold you harmless. But we will also have a step-up agreement among the participating agencies. So there's 4 member agencies that are participating, and they will all agree to step up to each other. So that will cover any default, and because of Santa Maria having a large share of the obligation, they would place on deposit cash, which could potentially cure a default by them. So it's a different step up.
Well, yeah, I'm kind of asking about the previously acquired Table A, not the new Table A, because I just want to see if we can get them at parity. So I keep getting told that there's no risk to the county because there's the step-up clause, and so I'm just trying to clarify what the step-up clause is and who can enforce it against who. So the question's on the table, and I'd really like the answer from Mr. Americaner. No offense. I just want the attorney to say that's what it means.
So we're talking about the step-up that was signed back in 1991 when the project was started.
Right.
Right. That's the basic allocation of water in the State Water Project among the contractors, right? That we're talking about that step-up provision, not the one related to the supplemental water that we're talking about today.
Right, the suspended Table A. I'm talking right now about the existing Table A.
Okay. So in the event that a contractor, let's say it's,
let's say it's Santa Maria.
Okay, let's say it's Santa Maria. So Santa Maria defaults on its payments under the state water contract. The other agencies within that region have an obligation to step up, take over the water that Santa Maria should be getting, and make Santa Maria's payments to CCWA.
Okay, but
CCWA has the obligation to collect that money, to enforce that step-up provision.
okay, so the county can't talk to any of the purveyors about that. I mean, they can sue them, but their defense is going to be you have to sue CCWA. We cannot directly enforce against the, if I'm understanding this wrong, correct me, please. But the county can or cannot enforce against an individual member.
That's an interesting question. There's no provision, as I remember, in that contract about the county's enforcement rights. But the purpose of the step-up provision is to ensure that agencies that depend on the flow of money are protected. And the county is in that flow of cash. Because the cash that the purveyors pay for their water goes first to CCWA, and from CCWA it goes to 2 places, either the state of California through the county or to the bond trustee who distributes it to the bondholders who paid to put the facilities in the first place. And I hadn't really thought about whether the county would have a right to sue Santa Maria, in your hypothetical example, to require payment or to otherwise enforce the contract, even though the county is not a party to the contract they're seeking to enforce. Under legal principles, that would treat the county as a third-party beneficiary, and I've frankly not done the legal analysis to know if the county would or would not have the legal right to do that.
Because here's another variant of the question. What happens if the members dissolve CCWA?
Well, It's an interesting problem because CCWA holds the rights that were assigned to it in the State Water Project. The county originally held those rights. It turned over those water rights to the 11 cities and water districts, who in turn turned it over to CCWA when the Joint Powers Agency was formed. And so the question you're asking is, what would happen to those water rights if CCWA were dissolved? It's not something that anyone has ever either contemplated, imagined, or analyzed, because it strikes everybody as so unlikely given the nature of these interrelationships that we now all have, both financial and in terms of water supply. It's one of these things that may be theoretically possible, but it's hard to imagine that it would ever happen.
Are you telling me that you want to say something?
Chair Adam, I won't totally disagree with Mr. Americano. I will say that the 1991 Transfer of Financial Responsibility Agreement preserved the flood control district's rights against CCWA members, which are all outlined in the Water Supply Retention Agreement with each individual member. But I think that what we're looking at here is one of the reasons why, as the county flood control district looks at this transaction, rather than have discussions like this, we might want to make clear who all is indemnifying the county, CCWA, plus which members of CCWA directly in the event there's a shortfall at CCWA itself.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Americano. Supervisor Lavanino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know for you this is probably like talking about fantasy football when you're talking about me. You just love this, but the late hour here and all. I think
the
it's
World Series is on.
Yeah. I think it's time we. I'll go ahead and make a motion that we move with staff's recommended actions A, B, and C, with the emphasis on in the negotiations of maximizing the indemnification and protecting the county. And that would be my motion.
Mr. Chair, I will support the motion, but I want to make a few comments if I can.
Absolutely.
I really want to emphasize the fact that we really want to protect the county's the liability here in the indemnification. And, specifically, as I said when I met with some of the people who spoke today and at other times, I kind of see this as at least two agreements. The first is, our staff needs to negotiate with CCWA about, what our expectations are for being covered for liability, indemnification, costs, CEQA, a lot of the things that were in the DWR letter, beneficial use of the water within the county and so on. But also then I think, in looking at discussing this then with DWR, once we would come up with an acceptable agreement with CCWA, that, my understanding and what I want is that the conversation is solely on changing the number, which is what Mr. Stokes has assured me several times is all that needs to happen, that we're going to change that Table A number from, whatever it is now and add the 12,000 to it. So to Ms. Krieger's concerns, I just want people to understand that if we get into this discussion with DWR and they say, well, hey, as long as we've got you here, we want to talk about more than just changing the number, that would come back to the board for discussion so that we would better understand what else DWR was considering obligating us to as a part of this transaction when all we really want to do is just change that number. So I just want to be very, very clear on that before we would ever come to any kind of a final agreement with DWR. So, I'm happy to support the motion. I will second it. I think it's important to look at this, but, there's certainly a lot of issues here that need to be resolved, and, we'll just see how we come out with it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, and just so I could note, just for clarity, that this motion was brought and seconded in the board's role as the Board of Directors for the Santa Barbara County Flood Control and Water Conservation District.
Okay, and I'm just going to put in a reservation of right to vote against this at some point when we get more clarity about what the level of enforceability is on this after negotiations. So, Mr.
We all do, right? This is not.
Well,
the-
I don't
wanna
want
make
anybody
sure.
to get the wrong idea from a yes vote.
Chair,
So-
and in response to Supervisor Wolf's question, yes, the staff's motion, draft motion that was added onto by Supervisors Lavanino and Farr was to return to the board for final approval. So this is direction to begin discussions with CCWA, and no final binding action is occurring here today.
Okay. All right, so Mr. Allen.
Ms. Wolf?
Aye.
Ms. Farr? Aye. Mr. Lavanino?
Aye.
Mr. Carball?
Aye.
Mr. Adam?
Aye.
5-0.
Okay. So we're going to adjourn now after a mere half a day. We've been here.
Chair Adam.
Oh, we
just want
do.
to make a closed session report.
Right.
So today in closed session, the board considered existing litigation, County of Santa Barbara versus Donna Cobellans, one case of anticipated litigation, conference with labor negotiators for all bargaining units, unrepresented employees, managers, and executives with no reportable actions. The board was also agendized to consider public employee performance evaluations for a series of department heads and did not get to that item, and that'll occur in a future closed session.
All right, good deal. We will adjourn till November 8th, and that will be just a juicy slice of fun. In Santa Barbara. That's on, yeah. All right. Thank you.